Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we aren't just cracking open some dusty old philosophical text. We are actually stepping right into an ancient, metaphysical crime scene. In Plato's dialogue, The Sophist, we are hunting down a very specific culprit. We're looking for the Sophist, an intellectual mercenary who operates in the shadowy margins of language. So let's start the investigation.
At the very heart of our investigation is a total paradox. The sophisms of Plato's day were actively undermining philosophy itself by making a seemingly airtight yet completely absurd argument. They literally claimed that lying is impossible. The logic went kind of like this. To speak falsely is to speak of that which is not. But what is not simply doesn't exist. So, since you cannot speak about something that has absolutely no existence, you can't tell a lie. Everything spoken must therefore be true. This brilliant little trick was destroying the very boundaries between truth and illusion.
Section 1. The Metaphysical Shift.
If you're at all familiar with the early Platonic dialogues, you usually expect a lot of poetic charm, right? Imaginative myths, Socrates playfully questioning people to birth new ideas. But in the Sophist, that whole vibe completely vanishes. We are plunged right into some seriously abstruse, rigorous metaphysics. And dramatically, Socrates actually steps aside. He just sits in the background as a silent auditor. In his place, a new protagonist takes the lead, the Eleatic stranger. Plato does this to signal a massive tonal shift. We're pushing way past Socratic boundaries here, and we need a much heavier, more dialectical method to trap our target.
Section 2. Hunting with Division. Now, the stranger brings a highly specific weapon to this hunt. It's a dialectical net known as abscissio infiniti, basically the systematic bisection of concepts. Think of it like a rigorous game of 20 questions. To test it out, the stranger runs an introductory experiment, setting out to define a common angler or fisherman. He doesn't just guess, he systematically divides reality. He starts with art, dividing it into productive and acquisitive. Well, the angler falls under acquisitive. Is it by exchange or conquest? Conquest. Is it hunting animate or inanimate things? Animate. Water or land? Water. He just keeps dividing, night or day, striking from above or pulling from below, until the exact definition of the angler's art is locked tightly in the net.
This whole angler experiment brilliantly illustrates what happens when the Eleatic stranger throws this exact same dialectical net over our actual target, the sophist. But unlike the angler, the sophist is a super slippery creature of many disguises. So as the net comes down, it yields multiple, somewhat comedic, yet biting, definitions. The sophist is cornered as a paid hunter of wealthy youth, a retail trader of imported goods for the soul, and an heuristic, which is a verbal combatant making a living off disputation. In short, he's a charlatan who possesses no real knowledge but merely the appearance of it.
Section 3. Gods versus Giants. Just as they're about to make the final arrest, the investigation hits this massive roadblock. To capture the sophist's true nature as a maker of false images, the stranger actually has to define what reality, or being, really is. And this forces us to look at the great philosophical gigantomachia, a literal battle of the philosophers that honestly feels a lot like our polarized modern debates. On one side, we have the materialists, who Plato humorously calls the sons of earth. They drag everything down out of heaven into the physical, insisting that only what they can literally grasp with their hands, like rocks and oaks, is real. On the other side are the idealists, the friends of ideas. They defend themselves from an invisible fortress, arguing that true reality is made up solely of everlasting, immutable, completely motionless forms.
Well, the stranger realizes neither of these frameworks actually works. If the materialists are right, then intangible things like a just soul or wisdom literally can't exist. But if the friends of ideas are right and true being is perfectly static and unchangeable, then the mind could never interact with it, because knowing and being known are active processes. They require motion. So the stranger issues a brilliant critique, offering a radical new definition. Being is the power of doing or suffering. To exist is simply to have the capacity to act upon something else or be acted upon. Therefore, being absolutely must encompass both the movable and the immovable.
Section 4. The puzzle of not being.
So, having cracked the nature of being, our metaphysical detectives are immediately confronted with an even darker mystery. To prove the sophist is a master of illusion, we have to prove that illusions, things that appear true but are not, actually exist. But standing right in our way is the ghost of the Eleatic stranger's own philosophical father, Parmenides. Parmenides established an absolute, terrifying law of logic. You will never find that not being is. For him, pure non-existence cannot be thought, spoken, or real in any way.
Which, of course, leads us right into the ultimate logical trap. If Parmenides is right, and not being completely excludes being, then falsehood is totally impossible. The sophist would just laugh from his hiding spot, claiming that since he speaks, he must be speaking what is. To catch the sophist, the stranger realizes he has to do the unthinkable. He must commit philosophical parricide. He has to lay hands on his father Parmenides and prove that, in some fundamental way, not being does exist.
Section 5. The Communion of Kinds. Here is where Plato realizes that the fundamental error of previous philosophers was treating ideas as completely separate, isolated spheres. But the absolute isolation of ideas is the annihilation of reasoning. Think about it. If concepts can't blend, if man is only man and good is only good, we couldn't even form the basic sentence, the man is good. Kinds, or classes of reality, must communicate and interpenetrate for language and thought to function at all. To explain exactly how this works, the stranger maps out what are called the summa genera, or the 5 great kinds. These are being, rest, motion, sameness, and difference. Let's look at how they interact. Motion is, so it shares in being. Motion is the same as itself, sharing in sameness. But motion is not rest. It is absolutely distinct from it.
And this right here, this is the absolute climax of our metaphysical detective story. By analyzing these 5 great kinds, Plato completely redefines not being. It is not the opposite of being. It is not sheer, black, empty non-existence. Rather, not being is simply the other, or difference. When I say motion is not rest, I am not saying motion doesn't exist. I am saying it is different from rest. Therefore, a false proposition, a lie, doesn't conjure up magical non-existence. It simply attributes properties to a subject that are other than its actual state. By proving that difference exists, Plato proves that falsehood exists, and the sophist is finally caught in the net.
Section 6. Hegel and the Legacy. The historical impact of this text is just staggering when you look at it. Before the sophist, the rules of logic were pretty wild and undefined, with a swarm of fallacies bred by pre-Socratic thinkers everywhere. But the groundwork laid right here, the nature of propositions, synthesis, division, and the categories of thought cleared the way for the future. In fact, it has been heavily argued that Aristotle's Organon, the foundational text of formal logic, could literally never have been written if Plato's Sophist hadn't preceded it. Aristotle gave these processes distinctness for sure, but Plato invented the dialectical machinery.
Now, jumping far forward in history, we see the profound respect the 19th century philosopher G.W.F. Hegel had for this text. Hegel actually called the Sophist the crown and summit of the Platonic philosophy. Why? Well, because Plato so closely approaches the Hegelian identity of being and not being. By discovering that negativity, or difference, is an essential existing relation that actually determines reality, Plato planted the seeds for modern dialectics.
So, we're going to wrap up our explainer on this lingering thought. Plato proved that truth and falsehood are not just brute facts. They are delicate relations, a communion of kinds woven together in language. The sophist exploits the very fabric of how words relate to each other. So if our ability to tell fact from fiction relies on such a precise metaphysical architecture, it really begs the question, just how fragile is the language we rely on every single day? It's definitely something to think about the next time you hear a modern sophist bending reality with their words. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the sophist. Keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.